Hi, everyone. Michelle Johnson here. I was a product of kind of the Center of Global Health, kind of like trying to expand faculty involvement. In 2016, when I was interested in doing technology-assisted rehabilitation and seeing how technology could bridge gaps in rehabilitation in Botswana. And I started the Rehabilitation Robotics Lab, and I wanted to know where actually could I do global health work. And I circled to Center for Global Health and CFAR, Center for AIDS Research, had seed grants. And I had always been interested in non-traumatic brain injury like stroke. And so the idea was, how do I translate that into Botswana? One of the key things I found out immediately was that Botswana, the stroke survivors in Botswana had HIV, and that was something that I was not familiar with. And so I got a sponsorship from the Center for Global Health to go out to Botswana to just try to understand what was happening in rehab. And that's kind of what I began. My first experience in the country was just mind blowing. You know, I've actually never been to Africa. I'm Jamaican born from the Caribbean, so I'd never been to Africa, and it was kind of whoo, this is great. um, but that also led me to see that there were really gaps in care in terms of rehab. Now I'm a PhD, not an MD, and I've always been working in this technology assisted rehab. I also did some investigation to discover that the numbers of physical therapists, the number of occupational therapists were really low, and how can we leverage their skill so that they can treat the number of people that were having disability. I also found out that most people after a stroke were unable to actually access rehabilitation because of the shortage in staff, and they would come in and they would get discharged immediately from the hospital, and they would head home without really any intense treatment. So that kind of began my saga, and then now I was faced with the fact that stroke survivors had HIV. What does that mean? And that actually caused me to pivot in a line of research that was looking at HIV, people with HIV only, people with stroke only, people with HIV and stroke, and looking at how our technologies could assess their motor function and their cognitive function. And that actually spurned research that I later was able to get an NIH a grant to continue that research. We now have actually robots in Botswana. We have a collaboration with my colleague, Makiel Maikutlo Kibetsi, who is a physiotherapist in Botswana, who is the co-PI of the lab, started a rehabilitation robotics lab there. We ported some of our technology. We were able to then do some work in the community in both Gaborone and in Mahalape. And I do have posters out there that kind of talk a little bit about where we are. When it began in 2016, I came back and talked to my chair. Dr. Dillingham has a poster out there. Hey, PM&R needs to be there. But I'm not an MD, so how do we get PM&R doing more? Because there was no physiatrist at all in the country and I was like, what? No physiatrist? What's going on? And then I met a trainee Cuban physiatrist, and she said that Cuba would send a physiatrist once a year. So it took a little while, but then Dr. Dillingham went over, and he does prosthetics and lower limb research, and then he went over and got a lay of the land and started kind of doing his work there, and then that created an impetus for him to recognize, hey, there is a place for rehab here. And since then, there's been now an official PM&R involvement in Botswana. And I'm pleased to say that they've now sent over a couple of physiatrists to kind of get the lay of the land. And I'm hoping with the rehabilitation lab that's there, that we can do more and more in Botswana. And hopefully, if you're interested in kind of learning about what we're doing, the technology assisted work, you can come and just check out the flyers of our team. Thank you.